The opening sequence for Invincible Season 2 throws viewers for a loop. For a moment, it looks like Mark Grayson / Invincible is in a tiff with the Immortal, the superhero his father murdered twice, but the scene quickly takes a much darker turn. Omni-Man arrives and quickly dispatches the Immortal, and we then learn that Mark and his father have now joined forces and enslaved the Earth in the name of the Viltrumite Empire. Omni-Man and Invincible act as though they are benevolent rulers, running propaganda messages on endless loops over the destroyed dystopia of America. However, one man, Angstrom Levy, is seen sneaking through the city and making contact with what's left of the Guardians of the Globe and their resistance effort, including surviving leaders Adam Eve and Rudy Connors / Robot. Unfortunately, Angstrom leads Invincible and Omni-Man to the resistance base, where there's a quick battle before the Guardians fall. Robot and Connors are killed in the battle, while Mark takes the merciful step of snapping Eve's neck just enough to leave her paralyzed, a move he apparently practiced with great focus before perfecting. The rest of the resistance is rounded up for execution, but Levy escapes via a portal, revealing this to be an alternate timeline where Mark joined his dad instead of fighting him. Back in the prime reality of Invincible, we get a montage that helps establish the new status quo a month after the brutal Season 1 finale and its epilogue, set to the tune of Radiohead's Karma Police. Mark is seen visiting the mountainside, where his father nearly beat him to death, and doing battle with a villain in an elephant costume, reminiscent of Spider-Man villain the Rhino, stopping a high-speed chase / robbery, helping an ambulance get to the ER quickly. Anything to put off the obvious depression he's going through. However, a standoff with two villains has Mark experiencing flashbacks that prove he's nowhere near over the trauma he experienced. A news report focuses in on Chicago and the cleanup efforts after Omni-Man's rampage, footage his wife Debbie and Mark cannot watch. Meanwhile, the Mahler twins trying to lobby their favorite jail guard Pete for better cuisine, when the same green portal Angstrom Levy disappeared into appears in each one of their cells. The Mahlers find themselves in the ruins of the prison and standing on Pete's burned corpse. They meet Levy and quickly discern that his superpower is opening portals between dimensions. Levy asserts that he's good and a pacifist and proposes an alliance with the skeptical Mahlers to achieve a unique feat of science, or he can leave them stranded in a hellscape. The Mahlers hate having to be underlings again, but take the bait. Back at school, Mark has to play the part of a grieving son who lost his dad in the Omni-Man attack, which at least works to solve his feud with longtime bully Todd. Amber tries to talk sense into Mark about his emotional health, but Mark is clearly consumed with guilt from all sides. For not doing more to stop his dad to getting sympathy when he, Invincible, was part of the reason for the destruction. Mark meets with GDA director Cecil at Burger Mart to discuss leaving the trappings of his civilian alter ego behind and working as Invincible full-time. However, Cecil shoots it down, telling Mark he's not as emotionally healed as he's posturing that he is. Mark loses his cool and illustrates the very thing he wants to deny, being as dangerous as his dad. Cecil goes back to the GDA, which is in the midst of a Guardians of the Globe mission fighting a baby giant. Robot, Rex, Duplicate, Shrinking Ray, Black Samson, and Monster Girl are actually working more like a unit than ever, but Rudy, now wearing Robot as an armor suit, has a moment that suggests his new homegrown human body has a potential flaw. Rudy nearly gets flattened by the giant, but is saved by his bone Monster Girl. The Mahlers are working with Angstrom Levy on his invention as he lays out how he's journeyed the multiverse and found answers to all the troubled Earths out there through resources on alternate Earths. Levy reveals that he has an entire army of his own variants spread across his home dimension and alternate safe house dimensions, all feeding him intel from the multiverse. The machine he wants the Mahler twins to build will copy the mental data of Levy's variants and combine them into one grand design in his own brain, making him the benevolent nexus of all realities. In exchange, the Mahler twins will get to occupy an Earth with no superheroes, where they are worshipped. Back at the Grayson house, Debbie gets a visit from Olga, the widow of speedster hero Red Rush. Debbie and Olga talk through the complicated emotions they both feel, as well as their mutual rage at Nolan for betraying them and ruining both their marriages. When Mark gets home and gives them an icy reception, Olga advises Debbie to help her son by helping herself, advice Debbie clearly isn't ready to hear. The new Guardians of the Globe are seen in their headquarters getting chewed out by Cecil over their sloppy handling of the baby giant attack. Cecil decides to add 2 new members to the team to balance things out. The immortal and experienced team leader and Bulletproof, a hero whose name clearly implies his invulnerability powers. Rudy accepts his demotion in acknowledgement that his new clone body may need improvement. Mark gets to reconnect with Adam Eve at school, and they talk through his daddy issues. Eve tries to encourage Mark that people can see the difference in him, but he counters that Cecil can't. When Eve challenges Mark to prove his mettle to Cecil, Mark steps up and volunteers to work for the GDA. His recruitment comes just in time as a global emergency is identified. The Mahler twins and Angstrom Levy finish building the machine to help Levy process the combined knowledge of all his variants. Levy is warned of the danger of aborting the process before completion, and then the switch gets thrown. At first, Levy is evolving as planned. That is until Invincible shows up. Cecil commands Mark to shut the operation down, and he starts to fight the Mahler twins. Levy is stuck in the chair undergoing the process and tries to reason with Invincible that he is fighting for the greater good. When Invincible doesn't accept that, Levy unleashes an entire goo squad of variant Maulers, much to the twins' surprise, and they gang up to take on Invincible. The Mauler variants get Invincible on the ropes and are beating the life out of them, violence that Levy cannot abide. He stops and removes his thought-processing helmet in the middle of the transfer, and the entire lab explodes. Mark survives, but is left traumatized yet again in how much death and destruction he seems to be at the center of. The Guardians of the Globe arrive, and Rex assures Mark, with reluctant agreement from Cecil, that Mark fought the good fight and shouldn't feel guilty. In a moment of rare teenage normalcy, Mark goes home and tries to care for his distressed mom before having to face another big life challenge: college acceptance letters. Amber tricks Mark into opening her acceptance letter to Upstate University before questioning what he hopes his note will say, as she doesn't believe he wants to maintain a normal civilian life with her. A kiss later, Mark finds out he's also accepted, and the couple has a happy moment. That happiness lasts until Mark goes for a late-night walk and finds the Immortal stalking him. The Immortal says in no uncertain terms that he's not sure of Mark's loyalties and will be watching him. Episode 2. The episode opens with Mark nearly missing his high school graduation due to a brutal and at times hilarious fight with Doc Seismic at the Washington Monument. After making it back in time to walk across the stage, Amber and will join Samantha/Adam Eve at her home in Africa for a small celebration. While discussing their summer plans, Samantha reveals that she plans to help with the reconstruction in Chicago. It's a bit awkward, but Mark takes the revelation in stride. Later, Adam Eve arrives in Chicago and begins using her powers to help rebuild a demolished apartment building. When one of the construction workers angrily points out that her work might not be up to code, a resident thanks Adam even for finally giving them their home back. After the same resident mentions that another construction site has been stalled for 6 years, Adam Eve turns it into a beautiful park. Meanwhile, Deborah suggests to Mark that they take a vacation together to get their minds off what happened with Nolan. Mark replies that he can't due to his obligation to Cecil and the Global Defense Agency. This leads to an argument that's mercifully cut short when Cecil tells Mark that he's needed for a mission. After Invincible takes to the sky, Cecil informs him that there have been multiple sightings of the superhero known as Darkwing, who was killed when Nolan massacred the original Guardians of the Globe. Reports suggest he's working out of Midnight City, an area that was cursed by a villain named the Midnight Magician decades ago, although people still live there for some reason. Invincible locates Darkwing, who turns out to be his mentally unstable sidekick Nightboy. Their fight ends up taking them into a shadow realm where Invincible does a far too convincing job of intimidating his opponent by implying that he could be homicidal, just like his dad. Back at GDA headquarters, we see that the Immortals training regimen is putting the new Guardians of the Globe through the ringer. Rexplode is predictably unhappy about this, but things get even worse for him when he discovers that Duplicate and the Immortal are now a couple. Meanwhile, Cecil takes a post-mission report from Invincible before a surprise meeting with Deborah, who is not pleased about her son being back in the field. While he tries to assure her that Mark is in good hands, Donald shows up, something Deborah was definitely not expecting since she saw him die. After Cecil escorts her from the building, Donald mutters to himself how strange Deborah's behavior was when she saw him. Over at the United States Space Agency, the astronauts from that trip to Mars last season discuss what could happen if the Sequids ever bond with a non-Martian and take over the planet. Unbeknownst to them, astronaut Russ Livingston is actually a Martian whose shape shifted into the former's appearance. They also don't know that the real Livingston is currently leading a Sequid takeover of Mars, but they will soon enough. Martian Russ goes home where his landlord is somehow able to deduce that he lost his job. The passage of time here is not very clear. He then sees something on TV about Martian Man, and what a great hero he was before being murdered by Omni-Man/Nolan. This inspires him to find employment in a way that might also be very fulfilling. Samantha goes home to visit her family, where she learns that they've fallen on hard times financially due to the destruction in Chicago. Her father comes home wearing a Burger Mart uniform and refuses his daughter's help, insisting that he can take care of things without superpowers fixing their problems. She turns an apple into solid gold and demands he sell it before heading off to do a media interview. Meanwhile, Mark meets Amber at the community center, where she works and flies her to the Eiffel Tower replica in Vegas for lunch. Their romantic meal is interrupted when Mark is called away by Cecil, who says he's needed to help with a diplomatic crisis. The Atlanteans are still angry about Omni-Man murdering Aquarius, who was also their king. Their laws also dictate that since Omni-Man disappeared, his punishment falls to his next of kin, or he can marry Aquarius' widow. Cecil assures Invincible that the marriage would be purely symbolic and leaves as a pair of Atlanteans arrive in a ship to take him to their kingdom. He teleports back to GDA headquarters and learns that the Guardians have engaged the newly reformed Lizard League, who are under the command of Supreme Lizard now that King Lizard is locked away. During the fight, the Guardians receive some unexpected help from a new shape-shifting hero calling himself a Shapesmith, who is really Martian Russ Livingston. Back underwater, Invincible is fitted with a breathing device and meets the Atlantean Queen, who assures him that they abolish the "who marry the person who murdered your spouse" policy years ago. Instead, he's forced to battle a giant sea monster. That would be challenging enough on its own, but the creature's roar is also able to disorient and paralyze Invincible. Cecil sends some backup in the form of torpedoes that destroy the monster's restraints, allowing it to rampage among the Atlanteans who gathered to watch the fight. Despite having a clear escape path, Mark once again proves why he's not his father and returns to defeat the creature, first by rupturing its larynx, followed by a good old-fashioned ass-kicking. Since Invincible saved the Queen, the Atlanteans decide to call it even. Cecil, on the other hand, is a bit miffed that he betrayed a direct order. The GDA director also orders Donald to send a recording of the monster's roar to their research and development team so it can be replicated. As Donald leaves, he asks why Deborah seems so distressed about seeing him and receives a lame non-answer from his boss. Elsewhere, Deborah's anger over Nolan's betrayal bubbles to the surface during a house showing where she witnesses a husband mistreating his wife. Samantha eventually returns to see her family. After finding the golden apple in the trash, along with the food she created, she attempts to empathize with her father before once again demanding he allow her to help. Her father responds by holding up a news article about how the park she created collapsed because it was on top of a sinkhole. No one died, but it was still a colossal mistake caused by using the powers, which he believes make his daughter dangerous rather than a hero. Samantha leaves with her father shouting for her not to come back until she's in line with his way of thinking. Meanwhile, Deborah finally breaks down after the faulty cabinet door that Cecil's crew installed pushes her over the edge. Over at GDA headquarters, the Guardians bring back Shapesmith and discuss his potential membership in the group. When Robot points out that they know nothing about him, Shapesmith makes up a ridiculously fake-sounding story about his history as a normal human superhero. While that's happening, the real Russ Livingston, controlling an army of sequids, defeats the last of the Martian defenders before getting on a ship and heading for Earth. Later, Supreme Lizard is assassinated by an escaped King Lizard, who retakes control of the Lizard League. In a mid-credits scene, Angstrom Levy interrogates a captured Invincible in another dimension about how he and his father were defeated, which basically came down to wearing him out.